So, welcome everyone. I'm Arnav,
And my name is Kulachi.
and we are from the Pixel group of TechWords. And today we'll be taking a webinar on how to make an FPS game in Unity. So, I hope you have downloaded the Unity engine, and we have sent the link and the PPTs how to download it and stuff. So, I hope you have Unity right now, and we'll get started. So first, what you want to do is open Unity Hub. So I'll just wait for a second. Okay, once you have Unity Hub open, what you have to do is go to your projects tab on the left, and then we're going to create a new project. So you click on the word new on your right side, and then make sure to select 3D, and then rename to anything you like, uh, FPS game or whatever, and then click create. Okay, so while it's loading, we'll show you the game that we are going to create. Okay, so this is the basic game that we are going to create. And you can shoot, you can move around, you can look around, and those are the targets. If you shoot them, they disappear and stuff. So yeah, we'll be recreating this today in the webinar. Okay, now hopefully it would have loaded for all of you. And now what you see is like the layout of Unity. So first I'll be explaining how the layout looks like. So we have 4 panels, one on the left, one in the center, one in the right, and one at the bottom. Uh, I'll be explaining a bit about each of these, just so you know like where to navigate and stuff. So the one on the left is called your hierarchy. Okay, this is where all the objects are going to be placed. Like if you have suppose a player or a gun in your scene, this is where everything is going to be placed. So yeah, it right now it just has 2 objects. I'll be telling more about them in a few minutes. So now the so so now what we have is the middle panel. This is basically a God's eye view of your game. So you can move around in this, and the way you do that is you right click to change perspective. You scroll to zoom in and zoom out, and you use your mouse button to move around, right? So this is the God's eye view, and this is what you will be using to, what do you say, navigate through your game and place objects and stuff like that. Okay, and now the next one on your right is the inspector tab. What it has is basically the properties that you'll see of every object. Suppose like the transform property, for example, has the position of your object in your game, right? And it has loads of other properties like if gravity is needed and stuff like that. We'll be looking more into it in a few minutes. Okay, so now the properties tab is on the right, just remember that. And in the bottom, now you have what's called Unity's file system. This is basically where you'll be storing all your files, like the code that you write, or your objects if you want any, and stuff like that, or your assets, like someone else has made an object and you want to use it. You can put it here and then you can drag it in, drop it in. That will be showing you all that later. Okay, so now since now we are familiar with the environment and what we are working with, now what we'll do is uh, we'll create a new plane. So in the starting, what we need is like something to stand on, right? So for that, we'll create a new plane. And the way you do that is you right click on your hierarchy, and you click on game object, or yeah, you click on game object, 3D object, and you click on plane, right? Is that simple, and it spawns in a plane. Now sometimes you can see that on the right side, the properties, the transform property is like it's not 000, right? So it's a bit offset, and this happens sometimes. So it's always a good practice to reset it, right? So the way you do that is right click and then you click on reset, right? So it makes it so that the position of your object is at the center of the screen, right? And that's always a good practice so that you know where exactly your object is and stuff like that. Now, when you see in your scene view, you can see a few arrows on the plane, right? Now, this can be used to move around. Like if you drag the blue one, suppose, it moves around, right? So you can use this to display stuff in your game. And as you move around, you see in the transform property on the right side, you can see the value of z changes, right? So you can either change the value on the right on top, or you can change the value just by moving it around using those arrows. For now we'll just keep everything at 0, and for now we experimented with this and we found that the plane is a bit too small, so you can rescale stuff also. So the scale we'll be using is for the x-axis you need 10, for y-axis we'll keep it as 1, and for the z-axis we keep it as 10, because y-axis is the one that's coming on top, right? It doesn't matter because it's just a plane. So yeah, so now we have a big enough plane. Now what do we need next? uh, we need the targets, of course, right? So we create for the targets we'll be using a cube. So we do the same thing again. Right click in your hierarchy, game object or 3D object, and then cube, right? And it spawns it in. And as always, a good practice is to reset the transform. So right click on your transform on the right in your inspector tab and click reset, and it resets it. And now you can just pull with the y axis a little bit. uh, yeah, and now it's on top of the plane. Now what we'll do to this object is we want it to interact with other things, right? Now you can see it has a bunch of other properties, like on the properties channel it has a cube, mesh filter, mesh renderer, box collider, and all that stuff. So I'll be explaining a little bit about these, not going in depth. You can read about them later. So the mesh render is basically it's like what you see, like the material of it, but it doesn't interact with anything, right? Box collider is what actually interacts with other things, right? But in this, we don't have physics right now, right? It can't fall down or it can't interact with other stuff. So what we do is we add a new property, click on new component. When you scroll down, you see a new component, and you click on new component, and then you type add rigid body, like type rigid body. Yeah, and then you either click enter or click on it. Yeah, so it adds a rigid body. Now what this does is it makes it so that it's a rigid body and it can interact with physics and stuff, right? And we'll be turning use gravity on because we want the boxes to fall down, right? Obviously. So yeah, so now we've created one of the targets. So we'll rename it as target one. And the way you can do that is just scroll up in your inspector tab and just rename it target one. Right, so now we have one target. We need three of them. So you can either do the same thing again by going one by one, or what you can do is you can right click on target in your hierarchy. That's one on your left side, and copy the thing. And you can click on your hierarchy again and paste it, and then paste it again. So you get three objects, and now you can move on. Using the arrows that we saw. Okay, so yeah, so these are the basic targets that are done. I hope everyone's following along. So I hope you have completed this part. Now you might notice something. If you have like suppose like 100 targets, they'll all be in a list. And if you want to figure out where the targets are and stuff, it'll become a little bit uh, difficult to understand where all the targets are and stuff like that. So what we do to overcome this is we create what's called an empty game object. All right. So right click, create empty, and it creates an empty object, and this is basically a point in space. Okay, so you can see it just has the transform property. It has nothing else. So what we'll do is we'll rename this to we'll reset the transform like always, and we'll rename this to targets, right? So after you rename this targets, what we want to do is we want to take all these targets that we have in our scene and put this inside this target object, make it a child of that object, and this is where the hierarchy comes in. So the way you do that is you drag this thing, drag a target and put it on top of the targets object, and you see it gets offset a little bit, and you can see there's an arrow mark next to the targets object, and you can toggle it, right? So it gets shown and gets hidden. We'll do the same for the other two. We'll drag and drop, and yeah, so now you can toggle the arrow bar next to the thing, next to targets, and you can also move. So suppose if you move the parent object, everything inside gets affected, so it's like it's stuck to that object, right? And you can toggle that arrow button to hide and show so that it looks much more neater. And if you have like 101 like 100 game objects and stuff, it won't be what do you say, cluttered and stuff like that. Okay, so now that we have a target set and all that stuff, the next thing we need is obviously the player, right? Someone who'll actually play the game. So for that, what we'll do is we'll create a capsule. Okay, so it's just the basic body of the thing. So right click, 3D object, and capsule in your hierarchy. That's on your left side. Yeah. So now after you create the capsule, you can see the properties on the right. It has the same things as before: mesh renderer, capsule, collider, and stuff like that. So now because our player is special, right? He needs to be able to move around and stuff like that. We add a new property called the character controller, right? Also, you can reset the transform and then just move it up a bit so that it sits on the plane, and just move it back a little bit so that it sits on the plane. So now we'll add the property, and the way you do it is go to the right panel, scroll down, add component, and the component that we're going to add, that is the property that we're going to add, is called the character controller. So just type of character controller and click enter or click on it, and it'll add the property called character controller. Now what this property does is help us make the player move around, right? So uh, so now but there's this thing in character controller is that it already has a capsule collider with it, so it already comes inbuilt. So what we'll do is we'll remove the capsule collider on the player object. So the way you do that is right click and remove component. This is because the character controller already has a capsule collider in it. So we don't need another one. So we just remove that capsule collider property. Okay, so now we have our player, this thing. Now what do we need? We need a gun. Okay, so for now I'll wait for a few seconds so that you guys can catch up. And okay, so now what we do is we have the player, we have the targets. Now we need the gun, obviously, right, to shoot from. So that again, we do the same thing. We right click and create 3D object, and this time we'll use a cylinder because it's very basic, right? So very basic gun, and reset the transform property. It's a good habit to do that all the time, and just pull it up a little bit so that it sits on the thing, and it's a little too big to be a gun, right? And it's not even in the right orientation. So what we do is we change the X rotation by 90 degrees so that it becomes horizontal, and it's a little big, so we change the scale, X scale to 0.25 and Y scale to 0.5 and the Z scale to 0.25. Yeah, so now you can see it's like a small cylinder, and now we position it next to the player, right? And you'll take some time because like it's the first time you're using Unity. One tool you can use is the on the top right of the scene view, the middle one. You can see these few arrows and stuff, right? And there's a cube in the between. So to align stuff, what this cube does, if you click on it, it makes everything 2D. And then if you click on the y-axis, it gives you the bird's eye view of it. So you can align it without any perspective shift. So select your cylinder and you can move it around and like that, and then yeah, so you can move it around like that, and then when you're done moving it around, you can click on the cube again to make it back 3D, and then you can either double click on the cylinder to focus on it, yeah, and zoom out a little bit, and so everything will be proper, and then you can move it around. Yeah, so now yeah, I'll wait for a few seconds for you to finish putting it. Okay, so now I hope everyone has done this stuff. And yeah, so now, but you might think, like, suppose if the player moves around, how will this gun know to move around with the player? Like, it doesn't know. But what we just did before, right? We nested the targets in the targets object. And what that made the targets object do is, like, wherever the targets object moves, the targets also move with it, right? So the same thing we're going to do with the player. We're going to drag the cylinder that we made inside the capsule. And this is a good time to rename everything so that everything is organized. So change the capsule to player. So we know it's a player, and the cylinder to gun. Yeah. So now wherever a player moves, our gun will move. And you can see all that also by clicking on the player and then using the arrow keys to move around. And you can see the gun also moves around. Yeah. See, the gun also moves around. Okay, so now we have the gun in place. We have the targets in place. Okay, so someone has a question, how do we move around the plane? So to change perspective, you use your left mouse button, right? And then to zoom in and zoom out, use the scroll wheel. And to move around, you click on the scroll button, right? See, like that. The scroll button that you should remember, not just clicking it with left click. All right. So yeah, now we have everything in place, but it looks a bit plain, right? Okay, so someone's perspective is messed up. Okay, so how do you fix that? So first thing you can do is click on the cube, make sure you're 3D. Suppose you're 2D now, click on the cube and you'll become 3D. You become 3D like that. And then when you're 3D, just double click on the plane to zoom in. Like double click on the plane in your hierarchy. Yeah, and then just zoom in. Right? This should fix your problem. Okay, so now let's get on with it. Now this looks a bit faded, right? We need a bit of color in it. So the way we do this is by creating materials. So these are like the textures kind of stuff. So you can color stuff and do everything with colors using materials. So now for this, just to keep it more organized, we'll go to a folder system that's on the bottom. We'll right click, create new folder, create a new folder. Okay, and we'll rename it to materials because that's what we're going to create, and double click on it to go in it, and then right click in your finder and create, and then material, and then we'll rename this to black. Yeah, so now we have a material, but we have a material set, but we need to actually set the color. So you click on the material, go to the right side in your inspector tab where the properties are there, and you can see this color picker tool and stuff. Click on the white box to change the color, and you can make it black. Okay, and you can see on the material it changes, right? Just make it black and then close the tab. Yeah, so now it's black. Now how do we actually apply this? Now there are two ways. One, you can drag and drop. So you click on the material, you drag and drop. Okay. Now suppose we want to apply to the gun, but the gun is too far, right? So we click on the gun, we go to the properties, or we double click on the gun, zoom in, we go to the properties, and right now it has the default material. So if we drag and drop inside, it gets the material, right? So yeah, okay. So now we have a black gun and a black floor. Now by default, everything else is white. Like everything you do is white. Okay. So now we need to color the targets, right? So we create a new material the same way you did it before. Right click, create material, and rename it to red. That's what we're going to use. And then same way, go to your properties and then change it to red. Yeah, and now just drag and drop in on all three of them. And you can see they all turn red. So now we have a little bit color in the scene. Now what do we need next? We need a bullet, right? Obviously to shoot and stuff. So now we'll be creating a bullet, right? So the way you do that is the same way you create other objects. Right click on your hierarchy, create 3D object and sphere, right? And always good to reset the transform so you know where exactly that sits. And then this sphere is obviously a little too big. It's almost the size of our player, right? So we'll change the scale of it as always, and we'll make it 0.2 everywhere. So all x and y and z are 0.2, right? Okay, so now we have our bullet, but we also want it to be a rigid body, right? We want to add physics to it and stuff, right? So same way we did before, go to your click on your cube and click on your sphere, go on the right side, inspector tab, scroll down, add component, and then type rigid body, and then click enter, and it adds a rigid body to you. Now you might see when you see FPS shooters, right? Bullets are not really affected by gravity, right? They don't fall down necessarily. So what we do is we uncheck the use gravity. So now it will behave like a physics object, but it won't be affected by gravity, right? So you click on use gravity and uncheck it, right? So now is a good time to rename our sphere to bullet, just so everything is more organized. Yeah. So now you might notice another thing. Uh, this sphere just like the bullet just sits there, right? It shouldn't be there in the game in the start. It should spawn when you tell it to spawn, right? When you click on the thing. So the way we do this is by creating what's called prefabs, right? So what we'll do is we go back to the assets folder, go to your bottom and click on assets, and we create a new folder called prefabs, Prefabs. Now, what prefabs are basically like objects that you can spawn in or destroy using code, right? So it like creates a physical object so that you can reuse it and you can spawn in using code. So we double click on the prefabs folder, go inside, and the way you create a prefab is you drag and drop the bullet into the folder. So you drag and drop the bullet into the folder, and this creates a prefab of it. Okay, so now you might think like, how do I edit this? It's an object, so it's like a package inside which all the settings are there. So you can double click on go to your prefabs folder. You can double click on the prefab that you just made, and then you can edit it from here. You can change the scale, you can do anything you want. Okay, you can change the color and stuff and all that, and it will be reflected throughout your project, right? So now to exit this, click on the arrow next to the bullet in your hierarchy. And yeah, so now we don't want this bullet right now. We already create a prefab. So we'll just delete this bullet in our hierarchy. Right click, delete. So now we have everything almost, right? it still looks a bit faded, right? All the colors look a bit faded because this is because the lighting isn't auto-generated, right? This is the default lighting that Unity provides. So what we'll do to make this better is we go to Window on the top and we go to Rendering and then Lighting Settings. Now this is where all your lighting settings and stuff is there, but we won't mess with a lot of things here because it's a bit complex and this is just the beginner stuff. So you can see when you look at the bottom left, you can see this box called auto generate, right? Now if you click on it, it will start generating its own lighting based on what objects you have in your scene, right? So now after you click it, wait for a few seconds and then close it. Now everything looks so much better, right? Yeah, so everything looks better. And now what we'll do is in the middle section of your game, there's another tab called the game tab, right? You can see it on top of the middle section. Now this is what your player sees, right? And now it doesn't make sense because like the player is behind the actual player in the game, right? So now the way you edit this is using the first two objects that we got initially in the starting. Okay, one was the main camera. In your hierarchy, the first object will be a main camera, and the second one was directional light. Now directional light is like the sun, but it shines only in a certain direction. It's pretty straightforward. I'll wait for a few seconds. Okay, so now we'll continue making the game. Now I'll start the camera part, okay, and how we actually see. So you can see in when you created the game, there were two things, right? There was this main camera and there was this directional light, right? So the directional light is basically a sun in your game and it shines only at a particular angle, right? And the perspective doesn't matter, right? Uh, so it's not like one object will cast a bigger shadow than another one. You don't need to worry too much about this. We won't be doing too much of it here. Okay, so now the next part comes in, the main camera. So this is basically the eyes of your object, eyes of your player, right? So whatever this main camera sees, your player sees. So when you click on main camera, just a simple click, and then you can see in your scene view, that's the middle one, on the bottom right, you can see the small camera preview. Now this is what your player will be seeing, and you might find the resemblance when you go to your game view, the middle section tab, game view. uh, you can see it's the same thing, right? So game view shows us what our player sees and the camera shows us what our player sees. So it's the same thing. So if we move the camera in such a way that it sits on top of the head of the player, we'll be able to see clearly and we'll be able to see in the perspective of the eyes, right? So the way we do that is like how we position any other object. Click on the main camera and you can see those lines pop up, the axes pop up. You can just use them to move around, and then you can see the small camera preview on the bottom to um, just navigate through where this should be, right? Yeah, just move it around so that the gun sits a little bit on the side and only a little bit of the gun is seen. Now you can see go to your game view in the middle panel on the game tab. You can see that the sky looks a bit like it has a gradient, right? It's not exactly a sky, kind of, right? It's like a void. So what we'll do is we'll make it a solid color, and the way you do it is click on your main camera and then go to its properties, and then you'll see this property called clear flags, right now it's set to skybox. You change it to solid color, right? And you can change the background color to light blue. We want it to be nice light blue. So now you can notice something. It doesn't change in our scene view because that's a god's eye perspective. but we're only changing it in the eyes of the viewer, like the player. So you can see it in your game view that it changes, like the whole sky becomes blue, right? And to know more about this clear flags property, you can read it up using the Unity documentation. It's a little bit advanced for this webinar. Okay, so now our player can see, but then you notice something. If the player moves, the main camera will still stay in place because it's still not the child of the player, right? So we do the same thing that we did before. We drag it and make it a child of the player by dragging it on the player. So now wherever our player moves, our main camera also moves, and our eyes will also move, right? So now the camera part is done, right? So now when you go to the game tab in your main scene, you will notice something missing, right? Something that most of the FPS games have. That's the crosshair, like the small dot in the center, right? So now we'll be creating the crosshair. Now the way you do it is you create what's called an image. Okay, and the way you do it is right click, go to UI, and click on image. Now when you do this, what it does, it creates a canvas and an event system, right? We don't need the event system. Sometimes it does that, sometimes it doesn't. So just click on that and then delete. Click on the event system on the bottom, and yeah, so now you can delete that later if you want. Uh, now what this creates is what's called a canvas. So canvas you can think of like the screen, right? This the screen of the player, not in game, but just the screen. Like you can paint something on it. So we can just paint a dot on it, right? We can just paint a dot on it, so it'll make the thing. Now the way we make the we paint the dot is by creating an image, a child of the canvas, right? So they have already done that for you. Unity is smart, but you can see the image is in the bottom corner, right? So that's why it's always good to reset the transform so that everything is, you know, where it is. So now it comes back to 0, 0, 0 in the canvas. That's the middle. Now when you go to your game view, when you just go to your game view, you see it's a box, right? And that's the default image that it uses. So now to change that, you can go to your click on your image in your hierarchy. Go to the image property color and source image. Go to source image, click on the plus icon on the right, and then you can choose from some of the default images, and we'll be going with knob. So it's basically a round one. Okay, so now when you go to your game view, now it's round, right? So that's successful, but it's a little too big, right? It's very distracting. You won't be able to see your target properly. So the same thing we did with the other things. We'll reduce the scale, but this time the transform of the canvas objects, like the objects that go on canvas, is a little bit different, right? So it look a little bit different, but it's essentially the same thing, right? So you click on, you go to the scale property and you make it to 5, right? So the proportions are also different. Now you have to be careful of that. So you make it 5, 5, 5, and then it should make it small. Wait, no, you change the height and width. Keep the scale same. See, it gets a little bit confusing later. Okay, so just keep the scale same. Change the height and width. You can just reset if you messed up. Change the height and width to 5 and 5. So as I was saying, it's a little bit different, and it gets a little bit confusing sometimes. So now you can see there's a small dot in the middle of your screen next to the cursor, right? So it'll help the player to focus on like where he's shooting and stuff. So yeah, I'll wait for a few seconds, and if you have any doubts, just put it in the chat. While we're waiting, we just customize our player a little bit. We'll add glasses to him, and the way you can like you can just see, so that you get to know. Like always, we create a new object, And you'll keep doing this often, so you'll get used to it. This is the first time, so it might be a little bit intimidating, right? So just create a cube. Okay, so one person answered, like one person asked the question. He can't see the dot, right? Now there are two ways you can fix this. First, the dot is too small, obviously, so you can change the height and width of it, like increase it a little bit so that you can see it. Now, if that's not the case, remember what we said before to reset the transform every time you spawn in a new object. So you just go to image, right click on it, and then reset the transform. Now that should bring it to the center of the canvas and you might be able to see it. I hope that clears your doubt. Okay, the white is full screen. Yeah, so change the scale to 111 and change the height and width to 5. Scale should be 111 and the height and width should be 5. Now you might ask how we know these values work and stuff. So you have to keep experimenting with them, right? Don't get like just try and move a little bit here and there and then see what works for you. So now that we have completed all the basic stuff, so you can see we have everything ready except for the movement stuff, right? So our player doesn't move yet, right? And the way you can do this is you can actually play your game. Okay, so this is a new thing. You see that play button on top of your screen, on the top middle. You click on it and you can actually play the game. But right now it doesn't move and nothing happens. But the boxes do fall down, so they work. The gravity and stuff works, right? So now what we'll be doing is we'll be adding movement to our game, right? And this will be done by my friend Kulachi. So she'll be taking over from now.
Okay. Hi everyone. So now that we're done with all the GUI part, what you want is to make your character move or make your character look around or also make your character shoot bullets using the gun. So for that, we need to create scripts. So just like you code, it's basically the same thing. Here you code in C sharp and we make scripts to allow the player to move using whatever input the user is giving or allow them to look around or shoot guns. So for that, what we do is, okay, let me show you first. So this is the game that we showed you before that's already complete. So in this, if you see, if I move my mouse up or down, or I look right or left, the game moves as well. And same thing, let's say if I can use either WASD or I can use the arrow keys. Let's say I move, so does my player. So since we want to implement this, we can do it using scripts. So as you can see, when you're moving, uh, your whole body or the whole player is moving front and back. So that is a property of your entire player. So what you can do is you can go to your player, you click on add component like we did before, and there's an option called new script. So we click on new script, and let's say we name this player movement. Okay. It's actually better to always keep it camel case. So, well, it's a script name. So let's keep it capital P and capital M. So it's called player movement. And if you click enter, it should show up in your assets. So similarly, like we made folders for, let's say, materials and prefabs, it's always better to keep all of your scripts in one single place. So we do the same thing, right click, create folder, and we're naming it scripts. Same. So we just drag drop our script into here. Now, how you open scripts is you just double click on the script and it should open up in whatever your default thing is. So, for example, mine is rider. So this is what comes default. So there's a public class which is already present for Unity. So this just gets everything that's going on in your scene. This void start is called once. Like for example, as soon as this script runs, this function is called just once. Whereas this void update, as you can see here, it says update is called once per frame. So every time your frame changes, this will change as well. Anything you put in this will be shown again and again. So, all right, I hope everyone's Visual Studio is opened. So I already have my script written, so I'm just going to explain it from there. So as I showed you here, what you want is for if you press WASD or if you press any of the arrow buttons, your player should move up, down, left, and right. So we write a script for that. So if you, as Arnav explained before, there was something called transform. And transform had three axes, which was X, Y, and Z. So if you see here, if we go back to Unity, um, you can see that, let's say if I click on the player, you see that the Z axis is what is taking it front and the X axis is what is taking it right and left. Okay. So if we go back, I have created a float for X and a float for Z. Now, there's a, like you do, like for example, in C, you get input from the user, right? Same thing here. You're doing input dot get axis and you're getting the horizontal axis. So which means that if you press either the right or the left arrow keys, or let's say you press A or D, then it will move right and left. So same thing for Z axis, we get the vertical component. So if you press up and down, or if you press W and S, it should get that component here. Now we saw that the transform was a 3D vector, right? So vector 3 basically here defines a 3D vector and we're naming it move. So you saw that transform was a property, right? So we're doing transform dot right star x, where x was the float that is of the horizontal component the user gave. Now let's say if the user presses A or presses the left arrow, this will be negative, which will make it move left. But if it's positive, obviously it'll move right. Same thing with forward. If Z is a positive thing, it'll move front. But if Z is negative, it'll move back. Now that we have this, we know what the user wants the game object to do, but we need to assign this movement to the game object. For that, first we need an actual reference to the game object, like you need references to object in Java. So if you remember, we created a property, we put a property on our player called character controller. And Arnav explained how we needed it just so that we can move our player or we can get reference to it. So here we've called public character controller, called it controller. And what we're doing is controller dot move. And this 3D vector that we have, we're setting it to the move property and we're multiplying it into a variable called player speed. Now, player speed is again something that we have defined, which is here public float player speed is equal to 2f. Now, what happens is if you declare something globally here, like player speed, for instance, this will directly be available in Unity. So you won't have to open your scripts again and again if you want to change this value. So we've created a public float player speed and set it to 12f. F is for float. So that's why we do move into player speed into time dot delta time. So basically, if we don't put time dot delta time and we just do move into player speed, then depending upon how many frames per second your computer allows, different players could be experiencing different things. So let's say if I have better FPS, then my player could be moving better than someone else. So what we do is we multiply it into time dot delta time, which basically allows us to not keep it according to frames, but keep it according to seconds or keep it according to time. Now this time is calculated by the number of times this update is called. So since it's called again and again, it keeps on changing. If we've sent you the code, so if you see this line, it basically explains what time dot delta time does. So this is all we need for now. So I'm just gonna copy this from here and I'll put it in my script. So in the update function, we have the user moving up and down, and we had the controller and player speed. So from here, we take character controller, and we also take the player speed. So both of these are global variables. And so let's say if you think that the user or the player is moving too slow, let me just save this. And if I come back to Unity, here you see that there's a player movement script now, right? So 1 second. Sorry, I missed this semicolon. Okay, so if I press save and I go back to my game, right. So now if you see your player, it will have this player movement script on it. And this has a controller and player speed. So what I explained before, that if you make it a public variable, I mean a global variable, then it'll directly show up here. So if I change the value here, it will change in my code as well. Now we put a character controller on our player, right? So what this needs is a reference to the controller. Since it says none character controller here, we need a reference to our controller. So what we do is we just drag drop player onto this little box here, and it automatically just takes reference to the character controller of the player. So now let's say if I play the game and I try to move up and down using WASD, or let's say if I use it during the arrow keys, it should start moving. So this is basically how you move your entire player. So let me show you what we'll do next. So if let's say the user wants to look up and down, because the main part of FPS is aiming, right? So if I want to look right, left, up or down, then I need to write a script for that as well. So since looking up or down is not really a property of your entire player, but rather a property of just your camera, because your player won't be moving here and there, right? So what you do is you go to your main camera. Sorry, actually put it on your player, because let's say if we're looking right or left, your entire player does move, right? If you're looking right or if you're looking left, your entire player is moving. Same thing if you're looking up and down. You can see the gun moving on the right side, right? So on your player again, let's just okay. So on your main camera, you're adding a component again called new script. And here you're going to name it mouse, again, capitals, mouse, and look. So this is a script for how your mouse will look here and there. So again, your script is being made here, but it's not showing because it's in your assets. So again, you drag drop your mouse look from your assets to your scripts, double click it to open, and it should open here. Since I already have the script open, I'll just show it here. So what you want is if your user is moving the mouse in the x-axis or the y-axis, since you can only move in a 2D plane, you create two floats again. Same thing, input.get axis mouse x. Now what this mouse x is already a predefined keyword. So Unity has already created these so that it's easier for us to use. So if you want to see what these are, you can go to edit, and there's an option called project settings. If you click on this, there should be an option for input manager. This shows you all the axes, and let's say if like I'm using mouse X and mouse Y, right? So this mouse X basically corresponds to how my mouse is moving in the X direction. Same thing for mouse Y. Now this is, you don't really need to change these because these are pretty much predefined, and they're pretty standard and to the norm. So same thing, you're getting the mouse X and you're again multiplying it to time dot delta time so that it does not depend upon the frames. And let's say if I want to change the sensitivity of the mouse, like I don't want, if I move my mouse to the right, I don't want my player to move much. So you can create a variable. Let's say we call it mouse sensitivity. Again, it's a global variable so that we can use it from Unity. And I've set it to a normal value of 100 float. So now that we have two of the inputs from how the user is moving the mouse from the right or the left, we since this is something that is when you're moving your mouse towards the right or towards the left, which is to look right or left, your entire body should rotate of the player body. So for that, again, like we did before, you need a reference to your player body. So we take public transform player body so that we get a reference to the player body, and we set the rotation to a vector. Now, what is this vector? Is basically the three-dimensional vector which you get from how how the mouse is moved in the x direction. So you do player body dot rotate and set it to this value. So every time you look right or you look left, your player will rotate. Now, let's say if I'm playing the game and I want to look up or I want to look down, I don't want my player to be able to look more than 180 degrees. So 90 degrees down and 90 degrees up. Because if you allow more than that, the player will literally be looking upside down, which is not something you want. So there's a function called clamp for that. So we did for x-axis like that, but we won't be able to do y-axis because we want to clamp that axis. So what you do is you set the x rotation, which is again another variable that we've defined here, and you set it to x rotation is equal to x rotation minus mouse y. Now why we do minus is because if you do plus, then it goes in the opposite direction and you want it to go in the same direction, so you subtract. And then you do math f dot clamp. So clamp is basically, it'll clamp this x rotation to minus 90 and plus 90. So the user won't be able to move more or less than this degree. And then same thing, like you set your rotation here, you're setting transform dot local rotation quaternion dot Euler. So I know these are fancy words, but basically what it is quaternion is basically used for any rotation that you do in Unity. So that's why you do quaternion dot Euler, and you're setting the x rotation, the x-axis to this rotation which you've just made, and you're leaving the y and z axes as it because you don't really care about that. So also, let's say if I'm playing my game, right, and I move right or left, and I move to right that my mouse has exited, is almost about to exit my screen. So I don't want that. I always want my mouse to be present in my game. So for that, what you do is cursor dot lock state is equal to cursor lock mode dot locked. So this keeps your cursor locked into to the center of your screen. So if you move right, it won't really move your cursor as much as it moves normally. It'll just keep it in the center. And same thing, let's say if you're playing a game, you don't want your cursor to be seen in the game because you have a crosshair for aiming. So you do cursor dot set visible false. Now we put this in start so that as soon as this script is called, this start method is called, and these two things are set in place. So I'm just gonna copy this and put it into our script, which is here. So now if I save this and I go back to our Unity project, since we put this in main camera, we can see a mouse sensitivity float, which is already set. And we need another reference to a player body. So our player body is basically this whole player. So you just take your player and you drag drop it here. So now it has a reference to your player transform. So now let's say if I play the game, I'm not only able to look up, down, right, and left, but I'm also able to move. Now if you see that black spot up, that is basically coming because I haven't set this cube in the right position. So let's say I set it a bit more back, then it should not be seen. So basically placements matter a lot in Unity. It's still seen a little bit. So what you can do is, I still want it to look like shades, so I'm not going to change that. Instead, you can change your main camera and you can put it a little more ahead. So every time it goes up, it won't be seeing that. So now your player can move, it can look, there's a crosshair in the center, your mouse isn't seen on the screen. Okay, so also to exit your play, you can press escape if it goes into full screen. We should have told that before. Anyway, so now that all of this happens, you move front, you can do everything. Now you need the actual part of FPS, which is your gun shooting and your bullet moving. So I'll just wait for everyone to say that they're up to par at this part, and then we can continue with the shooting mechanism of this game. Okay, so now I'll be continuing with the bullet script. So we have this gun here, and we created this bullet prefab as well. So we know that the bullets need to spawn from our gun, but there isn't any specific point that we have. Right, so we need a point at our gun from which the bullets are going to spawn. So again, we do, so basically instead of dragging and dropping to create a child, to also create a child, you can click on player, right click on player and create empty. So that will automatically make it a child. And let's say we call this bullet spawn. So now we have an empty game object called bullet spawn, but it's not placed properly. We want it to be placed at the exact center of our gun. So you can replace it and rotate your Unity project to see if it's placed correctly. So I want it here at the exact tip of the gun so that the bullets spawn from here. Okay, so now we have a bullet spawn spot. We have our bullet prefab. But what we want is if the user, let's say, presses the left mouse button, a bullet should spawn at this spot and go straight ahead. So for that, we need to write another script. So let me just show you the script. So on my player, one second. Okay, so this is the bullet script. Sorry, first, so let's say I press the left mouse button, right? And I want the bullet to spawn from here. So we can just write it in our player movement script. So we again go to our assets, go to scripts, and we click on player movement. So this was our original script, what we wrote for just moving up and down. So let me show you what I've already written. So this fire one button is basically corresponding to the left mouse click. So what happens is when you click on your left mouse button, so this is again something that's already predefined by Unity. Like I showed you the mouse X and mouse Y that were already predefined by Unity. This is also something that's predefined. So what we want is if they press, then it should instantiate this function. So if input.get button down is the left mouse button, then call this function that we call shoot. So in this shoot function, what we want is that the bullet should spawn and it should move in a direction that goes to the exact center of the screen, which is your crosshair. So what we want is, let's say we want it to go in a straight direction. So for that, what we need is, let's say, a ray. So a ray that is going directly from you to the center of the screen. So for that, there is an object called ray, and we're creating a variable of that. And it goes from your camera to this vector, which is 0.5f, 0.5f, and 0, which is the center of your screen. Now we keep this a little offset because even if you keep it 0, 0, 0, your bullet will not exactly go in the center because your crosshair has some dimension and so does your bullet. So that's why it's basically something that you get by hit and trial. So when you will play a game with 000, you'll see that it'll maybe move a little to the left or a little to the right depending upon where your gun is. So that's why we put it as 0.5, 0.5, and 0. Now, raycast hit is basically an object that stores all the information of what your bullet hits. So let's say if my bullet is hitting the ground, this hit variable will store all the information of that ground. And now what we want is we want to see if we want to instantiate a ray in such a way that our bullet goes in the direction of the ray. And if it's hitting a target point, we want the distance between us and that target point. So what we want is we do physics.raycast ray comma out hit. So what this does is it'll create that ray, right? This ray from camera to 000. And if let's say it does hit something, then whatever output comes will get saved in hit. So if we put this in an if condition, because if this hits something, we want it to set the target point to hit dot point, which means it'll get the point from this hit, which is a 3D vector, and it'll store it in target point. Otherwise, let's say if it doesn't hit something, what we want is to get a random point that's 1,000 distance away, but it's still in the direction of the ray. So now that we have either these two, we either get the target point from what we hit, or we get the target point from a random distance. We can instantiate our bullet. So what instantiate means is it creates an instance. So it will create an instance from this bullet prefab, starting at the position bullet spawn dot transform dot position. Now bullet spawn is the place we just made. This is your bullet spawn, right? So it does bullet spawn dot transform dot position. And if let's say you have any rotation to it, it will get that as well. Bullet spawn dot transform dot rotation. And so now that you have this bullet instantiating, it will only instantiate and it'll stay there at a point, right? So what you want is to put a velocity to it so it moves forward. So you do bullet dot get component, which will be a rigid body, which is something we already put in our when we made the prefab, and you're adding velocity to it. So since velocity has a direction as well as a magnitude, what you want is to get the direction first. So it'll be target point, which is the variable we just created, minus your bullet spawn location. So this will give you a vector which has magnitude as well as direction. And since we want only direction, we do dot normalize. So it makes it a unit vector basically. And then we multiply it into a variable called bullet speed. Bullet speed is something that we have defined before. Your public float bullet speed is equal to 6f. So what this does is again, since it's a global thing, it will just create a copy of this in your Unity as well. So you can just change it directly from there. And okay, so now that we're done with this, we can put this into our code. So now if the user, let's say if the user presses fire 1, it'll call this shoot, and it should shoot here. Now I'll just show you the bullet script as well first. So, okay, wait. So now that we have this in player movement, we can add our script. So we'll put this function, and we'll also put this private, we'll also put the shoot function. Let me just copy paste the entire thing. So now basically what our player will be able to do is they'll be able to move up, down, right, left. And also if they press the left click button, they should be capable of moving. So we put this in our script. If you're not following along, you can just look at these scripts. They've been sent to you on Discord. So let's say I save this now. And now it takes some time to load the script into Unity. So now if I go to my player and I see my player movement script, there are a lot more new variables here that need to be assigned. So bullet prefab is the prefab that we made. So we go to prefabs, we go back to our player. Bullet prefab needs a game object. So we drag drop the bullet to here. Bullet spawn. Bullet spawn is that empty object that we created before. So again, we drag drop that from our hierarchy. And it also needs a reference to our camera, which is right here. So you put it here. Right. So now that we're done with this, let's say if I click play, now I can, if I left click, it shoots a bullet. But as you see, all it does is it just moves, it just hits the box. It doesn't do anything, right? And also, if you will notice, like if I'm looking up and down, or if I'm looking, if I look up, my if you look at the end, the bullet is directly going to the center of my crosshair. So that's what's supposed to happen. That's because we've created the ray from our camera directly going to our crosshair. Okay, I'll wait for some time for you to say yes and that you're at par with this. Okay, so I hope you're at par till here. So now if, like I showed you, when our bullet is hitting, it's not really shooting, it's not like, even if it's shooting your targets, it's not doing anything to them. All it's doing is just pushing them over. So for that, we need to create a bullet script. So let me just show you the script first. 1 second. So here. So these are our targets as we have put them before. And the easiest way to refer a target is by, I mean, refer any object for that instance is by putting a tag on it. So as you see, this says untagged here. So what we want to do is create a tag so that we can reference all of these targets. So what we do is we click this arrow under tag and we create a new tag by clicking on add tag. Then since you see this list is empty, we can click on plus. And what it does is it lets you give a new name for your tag. So let's say we call it target. And so this is a new tag that's been created. So now if you go back to your target, you should see target as an option in your tags. So you can click on this. And now this object has a new tag called target. You can do the same thing for all the other targets as well. So now all of them have a tag named target. So it's easy to reference any of these. So I'll show you the code. So what we do is we create another script and we call it bullet script. And what we do is we create a function, not create, but we use a predefined function. So what happens is whenever there is a collision, this event is called. So whenever your bullet collides with something, this function is going to be called. And what it does is, if your bullet collides with anything, it will, so if it collides with anything, it'll obviously come inside the function. And then it checks if the tag of the transform is target or not. Because let's say if your bullet is just hitting the ground, you really don't care, right, that it's hitting the ground, because it doesn't matter. It shouldn't destroy anything. But if it's hitting something that has the tag target, then you should destroy the game object as well as destroy the bullet. So this is your function for if your bullet hits something. So since it's a function of the bullet, we have to put it on our bullet, obviously. So same thing, you go to bullet, you click on add component, new script, and let's say we name this bullet script. Again, it would have saved in your assets, but you want it to be a script. So you double click on this, you open your bullet script, and it should open like this. And I'm just going to copy paste this from here to here. Also, since it's doing destroy bullet, you need a reference to your bullet because it's going to destroy it. So it needs a reference to it. So again, you do public game object bullet so that you can get a reference to your bullet. Now, if I save this and I go back to Unity and I check my prefabs and I check the bullet, it should have a script attached to it, which is the bullet script. Now your bullet needs reference. So what we need is the reference to this bullet on this object. So we just drag drop the bullet and put it on game object. So now it has a reference to it. So now what will happen is if the bullet goes and it hits any of these things, any of these three targets, which have the tag target, they will destroy the target as well as they will destroy the bullet. So let's say if I left click, the bullet is going, and as soon as the bullet collides, it destroys the object. Let's say if I go a little back and now I shoot. Also, you can see that the bullet is going really slow. Now, this is why we create these global variables so that you can change it whenever you want. So our bullet speed was a part of our bullet speed was a part of the script on main camera or on player. I'm not really sure. Yes, it's here. So on your player, when you created your player movement script, we added a variable for bullet speed so that when the bullet is instantiated, it can have a velocity to it. So let's say if I change this from 6 to 12, this will basically make the bullet move quicker than it already was. So now let's say if I shoot, the bullet is going much faster than it was before. So this is why it's usually better if you create these as global variables rather than creating them as local variables. So now that we've reached here, what we've done is created a very basic FPS game, which has basic movement and basic shooting with a very basic gun and a basic bullet. Now you can improve all of these things by adding sounds or by creating better guns. So to do that, there is on your middle screen, you see this thing called an asset store. So Unity Asset Store is basically a place for everyone to put up any object they've created that you can import into your game and you can use it in your game. So let me show you an example. Let's say if I go to search and I search for box. So you can filter your search. Let's say if you don't want to, so Unity does offer things that are pretty high priced because they have really good graphics and really good quality and stuff like that. So let's say if I don't want anything, so I can just change the pricing to 0. And now, let's say I search for box. So it should show me options for boxes that don't cost anything, which it isn't for some reason. So you filter it. Oh, the pricing didn't change. So you put the pricing to 0 and you set it. Oh God, it's not showing. Okay, let me just show you something that we've already imported. Sometimes that happens because if it doesn't connect to the asset store properly, which could be because of some internet issues. Okay, so someone asked, can you repeat which script is where? Okay, so we have 3 scripts. One, the first script we made was player movement. Player movement script is under your player, which is because your whole player needs to move up, down, left, and right. Your mouse look script is on your main camera because when you move your mouse right, left, up, or down, your camera is the one that moves. And your bullet script is a part of your bullet prefab because you only get the tag of what this bullet hits and we check if that's a target or not. So that's where the 3 scripts are. One script is on player movement is on player, mouse look is on camera, and bullet script is on the bullet prefab. So Let me show you how to import an asset. So let's say we apply a filter, we put this to 0, we click on view results, and we search for something called a box. Okay, finally loaded. So what you can do is, let's say you want this asset. So there'll be an option to import. First, there'll be an option to download. After you download, there should be an option to import. If you click on import, it should show you this package on the left. And if you import it, it would be added to your assets here. So if you go to your assets, you should see this new asset popping up. So let me go back to my scene. If I click on my asset, I see there is materials, models, prefabs, and textures. So you saw how we created prefabs previously, right? So what you can do is you click on prefab and you see that they already have two prefabs. So you can just drag drop one onto your screen and you see it's really small. So let's say I change it to 5, 5, and 5 so that it's visible. And again, so what we did last time was we changed the tag of our targets and we made it target. So we're going to do the same thing. So all you need to do is change the tag to target. And that's all you have to do. Now, if you click play and let's say you shoot this target, it should obviously go. But even if you shoot this, it's going to disappear because you've changed the target name. You've changed the tag for this cardboard box. So that's how you can import really beautiful assets from Unity, and you can make your game, more lively and nicer. Same thing, to make your game better, you can add sounds, or you can, let's say if you shoot, you can add a muzzle shot to your gun, or you can basically just have better assets. So I'm just gonna show, so basically when we started off with Unity, which is we as in me and Arnav, what we did was we created a VR game. So I'm just gonna show you what we made so that, you can get some ideas or maybe some inspiration to see what all you can do with Unity. So our game is a VR game. So the movement is not with WASD keys. It's more of looking up and down. So let's say if you look lower than a certain angle, you move front or you move in that direction. So let me just put this on full and okay, so I hope you can see this. So here, as you see, we have different assets. So we've created animations for our bots. If I go close to the bot will start moving towards me. And if I shoot the bot, then the bot disappears, which is what we did already. And so I hope you can hear there's a background sound. Every time you shoot, there's a muzzle sound for your gun as well. And as you can see, like I'm going closer to the bot is going to start moving towards me. Now, all of these are assets that you can import from the Unity store. So you can also make these on your own by using different, uh, you can use different applications. So there's one called Blender, which basically allows you to create all these fancy things that you can import into your game. And you can also, there's a part of Unity that allows you to animate as well. So you can see these were all normal things that we have animated later on. Now, this is another game that was made, again, only for VR. And it's basically a zombie shooting game with a gun. And you can see there's, again, sound. So all of these are VR games that we created. So those are some ideas of what you can do with Unity further, more than what we've showed you today. But what we showed you today was basically the very base of what an FPS game needs. Okay, so now we can maybe do some questions if anyone has anything.
Okay, so we'll be handling questions till 10 o'clock. So if you have any, just put them in the chat. And we really had a fun time making this webinar, and I hope you guys had a fun time too. Always remember, if you like don't know what a function does, like in the script, suppose the best place to go is the Unity docs. It's the documentation of all the functions and all that you use. The way people find out about this is through there itself. So if you want more information about that, just Google Unity documentation and the function name, and you'll get the full info about it. And as Kulachi said, assets like help a lot in, like, you don't need to sit and make a whole player or like a like the whole body and stuff. So you can just import stuff. And YouTube is a great resource to learn. Most of the stuff that we learned it from Googling and YouTube and stuff like that. So you can really do a lot just by Googling and watching YouTube videos. So now we'll be taking questions till 10 o'clock. If you have any, just put them in the chat. Okay, so someone asked, how do we get the boxes to move in the random direction? In random directions, right? So it's the same way like how we made the player move, but like we made it so that when he presses the key, it moves. You can create a script that just keeps making the object move, even if there's nothing clicked or nothing. Just keep making it move left, right, and front and back. You can Google all this stuff, and most probably people would have already done it and made the script and stuff like that. I suggest you to understand what the script is doing. It'll help you better. So yeah, that answers that question.
And
Can
if
you
you want to
suggest?
search,
Yeah,
sorry, if you want
go
to search
ahead.
for something like that, you can maybe look at third-person games, where it's basically when the camera is not on the body, but it's following the player. So that could help you see how objects move without a specific script to it, if that's
Okay,
what you
so
want with the moving. Oh,
and okay, thank you. The next question is, where can you suggest places where we can learn from? Okay, so as I said, Google is your one main thing. Like you can literally Google anything, and it'll be probably already made. Somebody would have already done it. And Unity forms, like people post questions there. If you encounter an error, like while installing Unity, like I had a lot of errors while installing Unity, and I Googled them, and the I got rid of all of them because everything is well documented and stuff. YouTube, there are a few channels you can look out for. Just Google make a basic game with Unity and see which teaching style suits for you, and yeah, you can learn from there. But these
also,
two are like
there's
the
a
main big places.
when you go to your Unity Hub, there's a separate option for
Yeah,
Learn,
you can learn
which
from
gives
this
you.
place.
So this basically redirects you to the Unity website, and there's step-by-step instructions on how to learn and how to make. So this also shows you that okay, this is a beginner course, and it'll take you this much time to probably complete. And if this just reading doesn't suit your style, there are a lot of YouTubers that do this, explaining Unity code from scratch.
Yeah, if you have any more questions, we have some time. Okay, so there's another question. I'm not able to get my camera perspective right. Okay, so so you have to you see the transform of the camera. So first things, when you can't get your perspective right, you can reset the transform so it goes back to 000 and everything is 000. And then you see in the camera preview and you slowly adjust the values. Okay, and make sure you're moving around here and there on the using your right click and stuff like that, and just mess with the values a little bit, right? And that will change the camera perspective. And if the player comes in front of the camera, you know that the camera is behind, so you move it a little bit front. And sometimes it'll be like if you put the camera inside the player, uh, what do you say, the player body might outline might be seen sometimes, so just move it a little more front. Like you have to experiment with all this stuff uh, to actually know it, and the more you experiment, the more insight you'll get into this thing, right? So I hope that answers your question. Okay, if the camera is looking backwards, then you can change something. So if you see the rotation, right, look into the rotation property and like change a little bit. So if you change the Y rotation, what happens? If you change the Z rotation, what happens? Like that, experiment, and you will be able to figure it out. The
Other
more
than that, let's say if you click on your camera or you click on any of your game objects, you can see these axes, right? So if you look on your top right, it says green is Y and your red is X and your blue is Z. So let's say if you want to rotate something, you can look at these axes and tell which along which axis you need to rotate. So if your camera is looking 180 in the wrong direction, maybe it's your Y component that you need to change. So if you change Y to 180, then it should start looking in the exact opposite direction. I think someone asked, what do you call the castle-like scene in your game? I think they're talking about the VR game that we showed them. So those are basically called scenes. So let me just show you the game again. I think you're talking about this whole map that we've made, right? So this is again a prefab only. So like Arnav explained that you can make a prefab and you can use it multiple times. So this whole thing is made from scratch. Like each box that you see here on the bottom screen, these boxes are made by me. So what I did was I created the floor, I created each and every wall, using prefabs, which started from, like we showed you, a cube, right? So these are all small cubes that are combined together to make this entire thing. And you can make this entire thing a prefab so that it stays in position and it doesn't move. And you can move your entire map to the right or the left if you want to do that. So what the whole thing is a prefab, and it's made out of these basic 3D components that we showed you today. All right, I hope that answers that question.
Okay, so looks like we don't have any other questions. We really had a fun time doing this, and I hope you did too. And that's it for this webinar. If you liked it, like just go to YouTube when the video is out and give it a like or something. And yeah, that would encourage us to make more. So that's it for this live, and I think we're done answering questions. So see you all in the Gameathon. Good luck.
All the best. Create some nice projects and explore as much as you can, because it gets super fun when you get deep into Unity, and there's a lot of things. And we hope this webinar helped you out. Thank you.